Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I had not intended to dive back into the well of Mitsi Studio quite so soon. We've done 2 reactions to Mitsi Studio this month already, but I couldn't resist when I saw that several days ago they released a video about one of the most, I think, interesting figures of the 20th century, and that is Manfred Albrecht Freyr von Richthofen, the Red Baron as we know him, or as he referred to himself, Der Rote Kampfflieger. So we're going to dive into this story today. They did the Red Baron. It's, World War I is something I'm supremely interested in, and the Red Baron's somebody that I'm supremely interested in from World War I. So much so that I've got a couple of books I want to recommend to you for this one today, and I'm going to try to do this a little more often. The first one, and you may not want to read it in the original German, but I have this 1933 printing. It's one of my favorite parts of my collection of Richthofen's autobiography, Der Rote Kampfflieger, that he wrote near the end of his life. But if you want kind of a really detailed account, step by step, of his aerial victories, all 80 of them, there's this fantastic book here called Under the Guns of the Red Baron. And it actually goes through step by step and covers, and I've got this autofocus thing going on here, so you may not be able to see it very well, but step by step it covers each and every one of his victories, including this guy here whose name was James Maitland Stewart. Last name spelled different, but otherwise same first, middle, and last name as the actor Jimmy Stewart. But it details every single one of his victories. It gives the Baron's own report about that aerial victory. It gives all of the facts about what happened and what went down that day and the context. It's a fascinating book. And someday I have this goal that I want to do a video series where I actually cover every one of his 80 or so aerial victories. And I say or so because there's a few that could be added to that total that have been disputed, or it might have been more than 80. But I'm getting way ahead of ourselves. You can tell this is a subject I'm passionate about. In the meantime, I want to thank Kelsey Mackey for your support on Patreon. I'll put the link down in the description. I will pin in the comment section a complete playlist of all of my reactions to Mitsi Studio. Let's dive into this story.
Imagine yourself being an Allied fighter pilot, flying your fragile wooden biplane over the scorched battlefields of World War I. Below you, the earth is scarred by trenches and artillery craters, thin lines of smoke drifting across a grey, battered landscape. High up in the sky, however, things look a little more peaceful. However, looks can be deceiving. The sunlight glitches. A roaring engine in the distance approaches fast. You turn around, and to your horror, you see a red triplane open fire on one of your wingman buddies. Ooh. I
love the little detail that they show him coming in with the sun behind him, because that was part of what was known as the Bolka Ditka, which was the Bolka, I think I said Ditka. Ditka was a Chicago Bears coach. The Bolka Dikta was basically the rules that were created by Oswald Boeltke, who was the kind of the father of German combat aviation. And this was something that Richthofen himself stuck to religiously for the most part. And part of that was coming in with the sun at your back, so it was harder for your enemy to see you.
I guess his day just got a lot worse. In your day, well, basically the same. Because your squadron has just been ambushed by the most famous ace of the war. His name? Manfred von Richthofen, aka the Red Baron. Oh yeah, that's right. This guy is not messing around. You probably won't be his first kill of the day, and there's a pretty good chance you won't be his last.
And they've got Fokker DR-1, which is what that triplane was. He used a lot of different planes during the war. This just happened to be the one he used at the end of his life, and it's the one that is most famous because of that red paint, and it was part of his Flying Circus.
In this video, we will check out his life, his military career, and of course his death. Oh, whoops, spoiled that one already. Never mind, still, you better stick around because there is enough controversy surrounding this man, Fred. Now, before this guy went on to become the most well-known Baron of the Skies, Manfred was first born. Duh. On the 2nd of May 1892, in the city
Breslau.
of Breslau, into an aristocratic Prussian family.
So Breslau at the time is part of Prussia, which is, of course, part of the larger German Empire. Today, it's actually in the country of Poland. A lot of, today you think of Poland and you think, okay, well, it's all Polish people, but a good chunk of what is today Poland was Prussian and was heavily German. Now, what happened was that after World War II, when Poland's borders were set at where it is, and Germany's borders were set, East and West Germany, all those Germans who suddenly found themselves outside of Germany, for the most part, relocated, and that's why today you don't have huge chunks of German population in what is Poland.
And military service and discipline were expected from an early age. His father, Albrecht von Richthofen, had served as an officer in the cavalry, while his mother, Kunigunde von Richthofen, Schickfuss and Neudorf and Dumbass, long names impossible to remember, well, she managed the household and all the little brats in it. As a child, Manfred was very energetic and competitive. He loved horse riding, hunting, and marksmanship.
And honestly, these are all of the right qualities to have when you are developing something brand new, like a flying corps, right? I mean, this is the first major war in which air power is going to be increasingly a part of it. It's going to be combined arms. The first flight of the Wright brothers was just over a decade before the start of World War I. And so a lot of these guys who end up flying during the war start out in cavalry because there's a certain dash, there's a certain bravado, there's a certain mentality that seems to translate well from one to the other.
Yes, without online shooter games present in the world, those were the hobbies to pick for Manfred. So later he described aerial combat like hunting, where the pilot stalks and hunts down his target, waiting for the best moment to strike. And in 1911, at the age of 19, Richthofen graduated from a senior cadet academy in Berlin and became a cavalry officer. At the time, cavalry officers were considered elite folks. And despite all that, when World War I broke out, it became pretty obvious that modern weapons made cavalry, well, almost useless.
It didn't become obvious right away. I mean, early on, first couple of years of the war, many of the generals still saw cavalry as having a role to play. Very often what their plans was once you settle down into trench warfare in the fall of 1914, the idea was you create a breach in the enemy's line somewhere, in his trench lines, and then you send in the cavalry to exploit that breach. That was how you would use it. Tanks aren't going to come along until the first use of tanks is September 15th, 1916, during the British Somme offensive. And it's actually 2 days after the first use of tanks on the battlefield at Fleur-Courcelette outside the Somme that Richthofen's going to get his very first aerial victory on September 17th.
It's kind of like completing an academic gender diversity major these days. What the fuck were you thinking? You and your pronouns are completely useless. While we're feeling useless, bored, and depressed, Richthofen started to look around to be transferred to the German Air Service.
Yep.
Now, first, he was not allowed to be a pilot. Instead, he served as an observer in reconnaissance aircraft. He helped them navigate, operate cameras, and reported on enemy troop positions. At some point, he claimed firing a machine gun and shooting down an enemy aircraft. Sadly for Richthofen, though, the kill was not credited to him. I mean, what on earth, or in the air, does one have to do to get some credit for a job well done?
So, at the risk of sounding a bit like actually, I am going to do that here because I think it's really important to make the distinction when we're talking about air services during First World War, Second World War, and other times. We often use the term kill interchangeably with victory, but they're not the same thing. And it's important to make that distinction. These are aerial victories. Aerial victories mean that you take out the plane. It may or may not result in the death of the people on board. Aerial victories, 80 of them for the Red Baron. He roughly killed around that same number of people, but it wasn't 80 pilots, 80 planes. For example, his very first aerial victory, September 17th, 1916, 2 guys killed. So that was 2 deaths. Other times he got victories that didn't result in deaths. And the goal was not to kill the pilot. The goal was not to kill anybody. It was to bring down the plane. Now, you very often killed somebody in that scenario, and he describes, for example, in that very first one, that he initially hit the pilot, but the observer in the back was still shooting at him, and so he kept shooting until he killed the observer. So in that case, he was trying to kill the guy because the guy was shooting at him. And ironically, speaking of which, I think the guy's name was Reese, that observer. It might have been the pilot. One of the two guys in that first victory, his brother back home in England was struck by lightning and killed the same day. It's just ridiculous, scary irony.
Seriously. And since no good deed goes unpunished, Richthofen demanded his own craft instead of just assisting killing everyone around. I mean, after all, no history book is going to be written about shit like that. Now, eventually, he was allowed to start training as a pilot in late 1915. You would expect him to just take off and start killing everything that had wings attached.
Nope.
But surprisingly, his first solo flights were a bit rough. And by rough, we mean total crap. Rough landings, no smooth flights, and awkward control handling. Yeah, not exactly ace-worthy signs on the wall, yeah?
That's fair and totally accurate. He was not somebody who found flying a plane to be natural and easy, and you would think that someone like Richthofen, with all of the lore that is surrounding the man, that would have been the case. But it took him some time to get used to it. But once he learned it, what set him apart was not just that he wasn't like the best pilot in the world. He just was really smart, and he used good tactics, and he was a good leader, and he was fearless when he needed to be, but also cautious when he needed to be, at least until the end of his life.
That's what his instructors were probably thinking. However, at some point he met a guy called Oswald Bulker, and
There he is.
everything was about to change for the better. Bulker taught Richthofen valuable lessons like, attack from above and behind, fire at close range, avoid unnecessary aerobatics, and keep the sun behind you, and obviously don't get your plane shot to tiny bits while you're doing all of that.
Das Result. I actually think it's important for us to take a minute here to actually look at the Bulka dicta so we can see exactly what these things were that Richthofen was using in terms of how he chose to fly. So there are various versions of this, but here's the main 8 dicta that were written on a request of a colonel named Herman van der Leith Thomson. It says, try to secure advantages before attacking. If possible, keep the sun behind you. So, you're making decisions before you even enter combat about setting the conditions for victory before you even try to achieve one. Always carry through an attack when you have started it. Fire only at close range and only when your opponent is properly in your sights. These guys didn't have unlimited ammunition like you have in a video game, right? So you've got to be very selective. And Richthofen talks about that. I was reading this morning about some of his early victories. And he talks about being as close as like 20 to 30 feet away from these guys when he's firing. He said, I was 10 yards away when I opened fire. I mean, he got right in behind these guys. Hard to miss at that distance. Always keep your eye on your opponent and never let yourself be deceived by ruses. I mean, those kinds of things seem obvious, but when you repeatedly remind people this is what you do, then it becomes muscle memory, it becomes second nature, and it becomes something you're constantly thinking about. In any form of attack, it is essential to assail your enemy from behind. Yeah, you don't want to be playing chicken, going head on, because now they're firing at you as well. If your opponent dives on you, do not try to evade his onslaught, but fly to meet it. When over the enemy's lines, never forget your own line of retreat. And unfortunately, this is one of the things that Richthofen's going to ignore at the end of his life when he gets himself over the enemy lines way too low. And I have some thoughts about that we'll get to when we get to that point. For the Staffel, the squadron, attack on principle in groups of 4 to 6. When the fight breaks up into a series of single combats, take care that several do not go for the same opponent. Fascinating stuff. Let's get back to the story.
So he quickly mastered the Bulker 101 air combat rules, and by the end of 1916, he had 16 confirmed victories. For these impressive stats, he received Germany's highest military decoration, Pour le Mérite. Yes, I know. Sounds
French.
very German.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing that that the Germans have such a rivalry with France, and yet For example, the German emperor was crowned in France in 1870s. Their highest award for military service is the Pour le Mérite, which is a French-sounding name, but you'll see it often in photographs. A lot of people think of the Iron Cross, but the Pour le Mérite is the prize. They called it the Blue Max.
So, on the 24th of June 1917, Richthofen was promoted to command Jagdgeschwader 1. This unit became famous as the Flying Circus, which is quite a jolly name for an elite fighter wing created to bring death and destruction. Oh yeah.
It's fascinating that we think so much about planes being created with paint schemes that are going to help hide them from the enemy. But Richthofen had the actual opposite plan. They painted theirs in bright colors so that they could be seen, so that they could, have that element of inflicting fear on the enemy, because you know exactly who it is you're going up against. And any little mental edge you could get by saying, here comes the Flying Circus, here comes these bright colored ones that include guys like Richthofen.
Yes, these happy painted planes were frequently moved between airfields, including their entourage of trucks and tents. Well, I guess the name Flying Circus makes a little more sense now. In late September 1917, Richthofen started to paint his newly delivered Fokker triplane red. This way, he was easier to identify with his fellow pilots, and it made the enemy pilots shit their pants as well.
100% why.
The red painted plane also created his nickname by British pilots, calling him the Red Baron. And once the squadron...
So why the name Baron? Well, his title, Freier, was a landholding title that indicated... It was roughly the equivalent to a baron in the English language, and so that was why they called him that, the combination of the red plane and his title.
Airborne, they usually climbed to an altitude of 3,000 to 4,000 meters while the pilots scanned the sky below. And when enemy aircraft was spotted, the group spread out and individual targets were identified. With the sun behind them, the German planes went into a steep dive and opened fire on the shattering formations of enemy planes below them. The results of these coordinated surprise attacks were often brutal. The Red Baron and his circus friends achieved insane kill stats following the combat principles of Oswald Burger,
who himself was taken out in a friendly collision incident with another pilot, another fantastic German ace.
Successes, however, Richthofen was hit in the head by a machine gun bullet, temporarily blinding him, which, doesn't really help when you're trying to fly a plane. Now, despite being shot in the head, he still managed to land his plane. Again, like a boss. He spent several weeks in a military hospital before returning to duty.
And I would argue that at this point, something changed in him. He was not the same person after he was wounded. And you can see there's incredible photographs of him during this time where he's got his head bandaged. Very handsome guy, he's got the whole package, right? I mean, he's brave, he is a celebrity, he's got the aristocracy he comes from. He's been wounded, and he's a good-looking guy, but something changed in him, and I feel like he was not the same person, and I feel like that may have led to his death that following spring.
However, many people argued that his state of mind changed after his medical leave.
There it is, yeah.
He became more aggressive, which I guess was possible. He also became more...
He got hit in the head. I mean, if you are severely wounded in the head and you have been a combat veteran for years, yeah, that's going to impact you a little bit.
Risk-taking. Now, by this time, his family became concerned about his well-being, since a lot of fake news stories leaked to German newspapers, including a story that Richthofen was getting married. Now, shortly after, Richthofen wrote to his dad. "Dear father, I just wanted to let you know I am not interested in the girls. I am too busy shooting down the boys." Great accent. Oh, and stop Googling that. Of course he did not write that to his dad, you idiots. That story is quatsch, as the Germans would say. Anyways, on the 21st of April 1918, our brain-damaged boy Richthofen took to the skies again, when he spotted a British aircraft flying far down below. With little hesitation, he pulled his triplane into a dive and started to follow this low-flying target.
Now, as we follow this story on the last day of his life, keep in mind the stuff that I read earlier, the dicta that he was religious about following and insisted that his men under his command followed as well. Speaking of which, one of the men under his command was a future well-known figure that you probably know from World War II, commanding the Luftwaffe, Hermann Goering, who eventually would command Richthofen's squadron. He didn't immediately succeed Richthofen, but he later on commanded that squadron in World War I. He was a pretty good pilot himself. But notice how Richthofen doesn't follow all of those things in this action.
He would surely advise against early in the war. Apparently, zero fucks were given that day as he
Right.
followed this lonely enemy plane right over Allied lines. And subsequently, an Australian ground machine gunner spotted his triplane and fired several bursts into the fuselage.
Yeah, this is a Lewis machine gun. The Australian gunner is a guy named Cedric Popkin. The credit has been given to Roy Brown, who I'm sure he's going to talk about, but Brown was chasing Richthofen at the time, but we know exactly, he was examined. We know that it was a single bullet that came in from below and crossed his chest, severely wounded him. He was able to land the plane before he died.
Hit him in the chest, but again, he still managed to force land his plane.
Yep.
Not like a boss this time, because, well, he died shortly after. Yes, Germany's most deadly fighter ace was no more.
And he was actually still briefly alive when the first Allied soldiers got to him, because this was behind enemy lines. It's near the Somme battlefield. And some of them reported him saying kaput as he died. The plane was torn to pieces right away and went off as souvenirs all over the place. I've actually visited the site and did a video on that, and at the very end of the video I'll put up on the screen a couple of videos for you to check out, including my video from the site where the Red Baron was initially brought down.
Now, when Australian soldiers found the wreck and his body, they decided he should receive full military honours. Therefore, his funeral included a guard of honour from Australian troops, 6 Allied pilots acting as pallbearers, a military band, and wreaths placed by British air units.
And if you watch my video, you'll actually see there's actual video footage of his burial service.
I don't know what they wrote down, though. Despite being a pain in their asses, respect to the pro, the kill streak, GG from the blue team. Well, actually, we know.
GG from the blue team. Yeah, this was kind of a typical thing. They were thought of as knights of the air. There was a certain level of respect that existed between sides. Richthofen always showed respect for the enemies that he brought down. He would have these silver chalices made to remember each of his victories. So there's a strange kind of respect that is shown to your enemy in these scenarios.
What they wrote down: to our gallant and worthy foe. Basically,
Yep.
the same respect and the same cool and the same shout out to the most famous ace of World War I.
All right, I love talking about the Red Baron. I love talking about the Great War, so I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I hope you learned a little something. Check out those books I talked about. Check out my playlist for Mitsi Studio, and if you want to learn more about the story of the Red Baron and what happened in those final moments that day, and you want to see the site where he came down, check out the link in the video that I'll post on the screen here in just a second. I want to thank Isaac Tonelli and Sean Hicks for your support on Patreon. Thanks for watching.